This podcast is offered through the Sacred Community Project, an inner spiritual collective working to lower the barriers of access to contemplative and devotional practices. Through the universal teachings of love, service, remembrance, and truth, SCP utilizes modern technology to promote eternal values. Learn more at sacredcommunityproject.org.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Hari with the Sacred Community Podcast. The Sacred Community Podcast is a gathering of interviews, lecture, question and answer, meditations, live music sharings, and much more. This episode features SCP and Kripa's very own Sitaram Dass. Sitaram Dass was a caregiver for Ram Dass on Maui for over 2 years. He is now the director of the Sacred Community Project and a member of the kirtan collective Kripa. Sitaram Das is a licensed clinical social worker, and if you haven't had the chance to sing or be with him, is just an incredible bhakta. We'll definitely be diving into his time with Ram Dass, the Bhakti Path, and getting to actually hear about, what the beginning of his spiritual journey looked like and all the twists and turns that it took that finally got him to where he was a caregiver for Ram Dass. If you haven't had the chance to check out his book, From and For God, that is available in the SCP store. And my favorite offering, I think, and his newest, is the Exploring the Hanuman Chalisa audiobook, which I just cannot recommend enough. He goes line by line through the Chalisa and unpacks all the stories, the mythologies, connects all the little dots that if you've ever wondered, what does that line mean or what's that referring to? This is the resource for you. So also one thing to note is this was such a great interview and it went on for a considerable amount of time. So we're going to split this episode up into 2 parts. So this will be part 1 of a 2-part series with Sitaram Das. And without further ado, allow me to bring in SRD. I'm here with my beloved bandmate, Sitaram Das.
Hey.
Sitaram Das was a former caregiver of Ram Dass's. And let's see, how old were you when you first went out there?
Yeah, so that's the part where my memory gets a little bit fuzzy sometimes. I just turned 24 when I moved to Maui. Yeah.
How did that come up? Like, what inspired you? How did you first start getting into Ram Dass? What inspired you then to go out and just completely redirect your life?
Yeah. Well, I got into Ram Dass first when I was 21, I think is when I first came across Be Here Now. And it was when I was 20 is when I first started getting into spirituality and exploring different religious traditions. It's also when I started experimenting with psychedelics. And that just kind of grew over time. And then by the time I was 21, kind of just became a full-time fascination. I was just really devouring any book I could get. On weekends, I was going on, various psychedelic trips. I was experimenting with different spiritual practices like meditation. And all of this is, I was in college at the time. In fact, I got so into it, I almost didn't make it through college. I actually failed my last Latin class of my last semester, and it was a required class.
Wow. And
I just decided that it just wasn't worth it, and I was just going to be done. And if I didn't graduate, it was fine. And they ended up passing me, which, I totally failed it. I got an F, and they just bumped my grade up to a C. Which was kind of, at that time, I'm kind of starting to fall away from just mainstream things in general. And that was kind of another nail of just realizing that, even our college system education was just kind of a joke. The fact that, Like they would just pass me for no reason because I needed it to graduate. And then, I just kept experimenting and doing different things. And over time, just got gradually more and more and more into Ram Dass's books. And I would have been 23. I was living in Seattle. And it just hit me just one day that of all the people I wanted to meet, like of all the people I was inspired by, people like Aldous Huxley and Allen Ginsberg and Timothy Leary and just all those kind of people, Robert Anton Wilson, all the people from that generation. Of them, the person at the top of that list that I wanted to meet was Ram Dass, and he was actually the only person among them all that was still alive. And yeah, and I
kind of narrows your choices a little bit.
Yeah, well, but it also he was also the top of the list, even if they had all been alive, and so it just planted this seed that I just really felt like I had to meet him. And I told a friend this who I was living with at the time, and he was like, well, let's just, we looked it up and found out that he was living in Hawaii, and he said, well, let's just go to Hawaii and we'll just meet him. And then we looked up plane tickets and we saw there was round trip plane tickets for $260, which was, I mean, maybe now with everything going on, they're that cheap, but I'd never seen tickets that cheap either since then or before then. There was a small window of time, and we were just so caught up in the moment, we just bought them. And we didn't have any connection. We didn't know anyone. I mean, there was nothing about it that made sense.
And what were you doing during that time? Like right before, I feel like you kind of going to Ram Dass is like the tipping point. So like before that moment, what kind of things were you experiencing in your life, and like what kind of kept that drive moving, or like what was going on?
That's a good question. Yeah, well, so let's see. So this would have been right now, I think we're in April, the month of April. And so, that year, starting when I moved back to Seattle, it would have been the previous September. And so from then till April, I was doing things like, I'd done my first 10-day Vipassana sit. I was seeing a spiritual energy healer in town that was training me in all sorts of different healing arts. I was going and seeing shamans. I was just really experimental. I was even going to see psychics and tarot readers. And I mean, just, I was really like deep in it. And I also, I didn't necessarily have specific direction. So I was very just open and experimental and just kind of wanting to devour anything I could. I did the 10-day master cleanse. Just stuff like that. I did that mostly because I want to experience what a fast was like. So that's what I was doing. And I was also working a job. I was working in a group home for, kids with like behavioral issues. So it's kind of the backdrop of the things I was into at the time.
All right. So you get your ticket and you go out to Maui. Just kind of with the let's go meet Ram Dass. And so then what happens?
Yeah. Well, so we get the ticket and we get it for the end of May was when the ticket was for. And, right. And nothing about it made sense. I didn't have any connections or anything. And so I decided that maybe I should try and contact someone and see if it was even possible. Just reality kind of hit. And so I sent an email to info@ramdass.org, like whatever email I found on the website.
I love that we can share this now Because like after his passing, like we would never just be like, yeah, just email info@dass.org and maybe come on out.
Yeah. So I emailed them. I didn't get a response. But this really far out thing happened. And so around the same time as I was reading all the Ram Dass books, and I was reading Miracle of Love for the first time, I also started listening to Krishna on Pandora, because it was before Spotify.
Shout out.
Yeah. And, but I had no idea that they had the same guru. I had no idea that they even knew each other. And so we're watching Fierce Grace, which I hadn't seen yet. It's now the beginning of May. And, in the movie, Krishna is obviously in the movie, and he actually talks about being on the bus. And it just totally blew my mind, just the fact that he was there on the same bus as Ram Dass, and that whole pinnacle story of, Maharaji knowing, where they're going to be before they are, and all these things. And so I just had this moment of just feeling like, I don't know, just there was some synchronicity there. And so then after that, I look up to see when Krishna is coming to Seattle, where I was living, to do a kirtan. And he was coming the day before I was supposed to leave to go to Maui. And in that moment, I just knew that it was going to work. I just knew that it was meant to be. It was like my own personal bus story. And so I went. And so then after that happened, I wrote another email to the foundation, and I just reminded them. And then that time I did get a response, and it was Mike Krall who wrote, because at that point in time, Mike Krall was managing the heart to hearts, I think. And, I mean, he had way more hats then. And he just said, I passed on your information, but Ram Dass is busy and we'll see. But I just knew it was going to work. And so I went and I saw Krishna Das. And then the day after, I flew to Maui with my two friends, and we hitchhiked and slept on beaches, and we just waited around for the call. And
which is amazing, though, because come on, that's not a common story anymore. If you heard that in the 60s or the 70s, that makes sense. But I mean, that was pretty renegade.
Yeah, now it seems so far out, because I don't know if I'm the same person now or whatever. I don't know if I would do that again, but I just really felt like I had to do it. And it was also, before I'd moved back to Seattle, I was living out of my car in the desert of New Mexico for a few months, solely doing my spiritual work. And, I did a tree sit in Berkeley. I lived,
All right. For those who don't know what a tree sit is.
Yeah. So this is it's a failed tree sit story, because they ended up cutting the oak grove. But there's an oak grove in the city of Berkeley. It was next to their sports stadium, and the school of Berkeley wanted to cut it down, but the city of Berkeley had an ordinance that said that, oak trees of a certain size can't be cut down.
That's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear, but the school gets to bypass it because they follow state law. I don't know. But anyway, a group of anarchist hippies went up, and they created kind of this Ewok village up in the trees, and everything was connected by ropes, and you wore these harnesses. And
no way.
Yeah, it was. So I had just come back from living out of my car in New Mexico for a few months, where I was just solely focused on trying to figure out my spiritual life. And I was on my way back to Seattle, and I just saw them, and they said, "Do you want to come up?" And I didn't have any directions, so I went up and lived with them for a week. That's actually how I learned to chant Om for the first time.
Amazing. See, it all happens. It's all happening.
So anyway, sleeping on the beaches and hitchhiking like that, at that time in my life, that was kind of par for the course.
That was just Wednesday.
But we did get the call, and Dasima called us, and we went to the house, and I was there with my two friends. We were on the back lanai and the back patio porch, and Ram Dass, his room is up a flight of stairs in the house, and he's in a wheelchair, so to come down to that back lanai, he has this like wheelchair elevator thing. Mm-hmm. And so we sat there as, Ram Dass descended down from the heavens in his wheelchair, and it was everything. I was meeting my spiritual teacher. I was like in awe. He was glowing, there was this real palpable thing, but then also it was like meeting a rock star or something. I had all of the timid, like teenager feelings of, meeting, like whatever, your rock star idol. Like all of that was just circulating in that moment.
When you say that you were meeting your spiritual teacher, what did that mean to you then, and what does that mean to you now?
Yeah. What did it mean then? I mean, then, I don't know if I knew what it meant then. It was just a feeling. But at that point, I'd read almost every one of his books. And even though I was going there to meet him, kind of the conversation I had with my friend where that came out is I actually told him that I wanted to meet him so bad. I thought maybe I should just move to Maui because I saw that he gave talks sometimes there. And so I thought if I was just living on island, maybe I'd get to see him talk. And I mean, so that was my thinking. So I don't know if I knew what it meant that he was my teacher. I mean, at that point he was just a teacher, but he was still the most important teacher for me. And I did know that. In terms of what it means now is, I still don't know what that means, honestly, but it feels way deeper and way more present in my body right now. I just, especially, when he almost died, last year, and, I wasn't able to go to Maui and be with them, and I hadn't really been at the house in a while, and I hadn't been in regular contact with him in a while. I just, I went through this whole process of just, just really figuring what that all meant and like what he really meant to me. And really got clear on it actually before, he did leave his body at the end of December, that he just is my root teacher. And I know that he's on his own soul's journey and his own being, but in my heart of hearts, like he's no different for me than the Maharaji. It's just, the way I feel when I look at him is the same way I feel when I look at Maharaji. Like there's no different. So for me, like I look at his eyes in the picture right now, I'm looking at him, and it's a straight doorway into God. And so, I mean, how do you explain that kind of relationship? But, cause it's not just the teachings anymore. In fact, the teachings,
right.
Those are even secondary. I still enjoy listening to his talks, but that's not the level of him being my root teacher.
So can you explain what that is?
Yeah.
Kind of the concept of a root teacher and your connection to it and your connection to Ram Dass in that way.
Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying this, because I would say this to people after I left the house, and people would ask, like, what was it like being with him? And when you're there, you basically go to every talk he gives, and, you're in charge of managing the webcams and stuff. And so you're in the room when he gives all his talks over Skype to places. And then I would listen to his talks all the time. And so I was steeped in his teachings while I was there, and there was a few moments when he said certain things at the right moment, but really it was just being around him. Like he just held such a depth of presence in his being. And he just showed me that the teachings are real, because I got to see that he's a human being. I got to see him go through the full emotional response of being human. I got to see him grumpy in the mornings. I got to relate to him in an interpersonal way like that. But through that, I saw that, when he talks about that practice of being loving awareness, I saw that it's real. And because he's human, it just made it so much more clear that it's our birthright, and that we have access to that. Like right now, that we don't have to wait for something. The most important thing that he did for me was just to look at me unconditionally, like with unconditional love. When we're at the house, we're more just of service and doing things, but most of us got to have at least one-on-one with him. It was normally in the beginning, right? It's normally how it went.
Dude, how wild is that too? Like, it's so funny. Like, my expectations going in were so interesting. Like, I thought that I was going in and like we would be doing like morning meditation and like some kind of ceremony. I didn't even know like RT. I knew nothing. I did all my learning for the most part while I was there. And then like having like, like Dharma talks. Like I figured like we would have Dharma talks and stuff. And that was not the case. And it's interesting. I have the same thing when people start asking like, so what did you learn there? What was it like? It was like a weird, extraordinary, normal life. But that like, it's taken me pretty much, I don't know, like 6 years, I think, to finally start getting that. Like it was the information, but it was kind of a morph of being like, I was not a happy dude. Like I was not like a healthy guy. Like within the first 3 weeks there, I lost like 26 pounds and was just emotionally just going through it. I did the cleanse when I got to the house. Dasima asked, or it was the second day, and she said, we're going to start a cleanse. Ram Dass, the whole house is doing a cleanse. Like, do you want to do it? And I was like, okay. And, dude, it was like a purge.
Yeah.
But
wow.
I came out of that, and like after like leaving the house and like looking back all these years now, like one of the things that I recognize now is I learned how to be quiet. And like how to like anticipate people's needs better without them having to say anything, how to just kind of tune in to a room. And like I went from listening to like gangster rap and My Chemical Romance and like listening to that still like in the house, like in the shower and stuff, like to, it's like when we were talking about it in the car, just like, I just kind of listen to chanting now. And there's not much else that like, it just, I don't feel connected kind of any other way. So much.
That's interesting. So my preparation thing. So the whole way that I got to move there was when we were with Ram Dass. He said that like basically if I came to Maui, maybe that they always need help around the garden. So maybe there'd be something that I could do. It was like that. And that was enough. So I dropped everything in my life and I moved to Maui.
That was enough.
Yeah.
Maybe you could work in the garden.
I found this guy in Paia that let me sleep on his back porch, and I paid him $100 a month for like utilities, basically, to use his kitchen and shower. And then I just started calling the house until finally Dasima called me back and said I could come and garden. And I literally thought I was going to be volunteering.
Right.
And she ended up paying me, and then I thought I had it made.
Right.
And so then...
And what else do you want?
Yeah. And so then shortly after that, I moved actually onto Twin Falls. I got this bamboo hut. I was doing work trade there for this bamboo hut. I had no electricity. And I just had my harmonium, and Dasima was giving me like every Maharaji book from the house.
Wow.
And I just decided to commit. My goal was to learn the Hanuman Chalisa before I moved in. Because I knew nothing. Like literally I just thought if I learned it, maybe I could chant it for Ram Dass. So I got this kind of 4-month period of like that was like my kind of preparatory period, so that when I came to the house, I was just a full-on Maharaji devotee who chanted the Hanuman Chalisa. And so it's interesting. So my kind of preparation period happened, like I was a part of the house, but I hadn't moved in yet.
Right.
But I had that same, I remember telling a friend, I really feel like what I need right now is just someone to tell me what to do. And so I feel really like, I'll go there and I'll have a teacher and he'll tell me what to do and I'll have some direction in my practice.
Totally.
Then Ram Dass never told me to do anything.
Not a thing.
In my heart to heart, he told me that I should read the Bhagavad Gita. And I told him I had.
Yep.
And then he said, you should read it again.
Yeah. No, yeah, Baba, I already did that.
Yeah. So that was I guess an instruction, but he was supportive. They let me build a canopy structure at the bottom of the house, where I could keep up with my chanting practice. And, Ram Dass was always very supportive of me doing that. It's interesting. I mean, we all just came there. I mean, exactly when we needed what we got. I mean, I had a lot of my really difficult stuff I'd gone through, before I got there. And a lot of my kind of confused part of my spiritual searching but because before moving in, I'd already learned that God was real, and that we could have a personal relationship with that. And I started to understand, a little bit experientially about just entering into that worldview of Guru Kripa.
Right.
When I met Ram Dass that first time before deciding to move there, he just said, I told him my whole story and all the things. And he just said, well, no one comes in front of me unless Maharaji sent them. And I had no idea what that meant at all, but it blew my mind because he just sounded so certain.
Oh yeah. Yep. Totally.
And, and then that night I had a dream of Maharaji, and that kind of started,
Was that your first?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, before that, I'd had a really strong connection with Christ, and I was actively kind of engaging with that in the last year. It was kind of just an experiment on my consciousness. And what happened was that night I had a dream as I was falling asleep on the beach, because, we were still hitchhiking, and that was out in Hana, where I saw Maharaji in Christ next to each other. They were like hovering above the ground on the beach. That point, like right when you're falling asleep, where like the physical world there morphs into your dream world. Yeah. So it was like, it was like I was seeing it. I'm positive my eyes were closed and I was falling asleep, but it was the beach that I was laying on, and they were there hovering off the ground, and they're shape-shifting back and forth into each other's forms. And then from then it was like, it was just the form switched for me. Cause the Christ form, I gained so much from it, but, I had issues with it because, one, I never found an image that I liked. And I didn't find like other like followers of Christ that like totally felt, mix with my metaphysical worldview. And then, Maharaji just gave me everything. But, yeah, but back to your thing about, Ram Dass being the root teacher, he taught me that unconditional love is real, and that it is actually at the core of each of our fragile human hearts. And that is just the gift that keeps on giving.
So, I mean, especially anybody who's heard Ram Dass before, we've heard this a lot, right? But to experience it and to know it, right, is a different thing. So, what is it that you feel, or how do you know? Like, what is that experience like for you?
What that experience is like for me is that, with all of the thoughts I have, even my judgmental thoughts, even my self-hatreds, even, I'm prone to, I feel like we all have certain emotional states that we're more prone to than others. And for me, anxiety is one that comes easily, or anger, but anxiety even more so. With the physical pains in my body, just that it's possible to drop back, and that it can all be held in this container of loving awareness, and that it's actually just all okay, that I don't have to fight myself anymore. Like I don't have to wish that I was different, or I can let go of that inner struggle, and that truly every single thing that comes into our awareness is lovable, because existence itself is inherently lovable. And it's not something that's rational. It's not something that can be proven, but these spiritual teachings and Ram Dass's teachings, they're there with this kind of promise that there's things that we can do that can help us remember. And for those of us who, if we've never had an awakening of that, there's things that we can do to start to taste that ourselves. And then, once we gain the first taste, that kind of helps us keep going for more, that gives us a little bit more faith to keep going with the practices. And then over time, it just starts to feel, rather than being a special thing, it's more just remembering, just remembering that basic truth of love.
So what are the techniques and methods that you use to experience that, and then to just anything that you do to kind of support trying to be more and more in that awareness?
So the easiest practices to talk about are the more formal ones. So even right now, I'm sitting in front of my puja table, and in fact, this is probably the number one practice that I feel like we all learned from Ram Dass, was just because he had that glorious puja table, right? This altar that has all of these saints from all these different world traditions. And of course, has a big picture of Maharaji on it. But beyond that, Ram Dass also has basically pictures of either Hanuman or Maharaji on every single wall and every single room in his house.
Yep.
And I once asked him, in the beginning, that's another thing I found that's kind of common among all this, is in the beginning is when we really have a lot of questions. And then eventually we realize that that's not really the heart of it. But one of my first questions was like, so what does your spiritual practice look like now? And there's that long pause, and Ram Dass says, well, I just hang out with Maharaji.
Yeah.
And something as simple as a puja table, it's what facilitates that, right? So by having these beings on my table, right now I'm looking at Hanuman, and I have my big, beautiful picture of Ram Dass, and I have Maharaji, and I have Siddhi Ma. I also have Krishna and Radha, and I have Ganesha, and I have Kali, and I'm looking at a Shiva Lingam. But these are all beings that represent for me God, that ineffable presence that is the heart of my own being. And when I look at them, it serves as an instant reminder for my heart to be open. And yeah, they hold that extra weight. And there's things that we can do to bring kind of all of our body and our mind and consciousness into it. So, my basic practice is to just chant in front of them, to just sing. And of course, the names that we're singing are the holy names. These are also doorways. These are names of God. And so that's like, that's basic like practice. But what it's facilitating is an inner practice of just recognizing that that all of my experience, everything in my awareness is God, and that everything I can fall in front of and I can worship, and that I can fall even madly in love with. And so there's that the inner practice and the outer practice, and sometimes the inner practice is a little bit harder to talk about. But there's, other outer practices that we can do throughout the day, like chanting mantra internally. So, I've been doing that now also as I'm talking with you, just to keep me centered, right? I have my beads in my hand and just doing internal mantra. And so those are the things I do to help me remember. But I also have kind of oriented my life, at some point, in the first few months when I was there, Ram Dass was Skyping into, Frank Oskazeski's Death and Dying group on the West Coast. And, Ram Dass was a part of that and would give talks to them. They were training for how to be bedside with dying. And, Ram Dass said this many times. I'm sure he said this many times before then, and he said that many times after, but it was the first time I heard it when he said, your job when you're with the dying person is to be a loving rock, so the person can push against you and pull against you, and you stay rooted in love. And in that moment, every hair in my body stood up, and I just knew that that's what I wanted to do with my entire life. So now I work in mental health. I work in, public mental health. And my job is just to be present with people throughout the day. And I just, I'm learning all these different techniques and all these different therapeutic modalities and all these different skills, but still for me, the pinnacle of what I want to do with another person is what Ram Dass did for me, which is just, I got to feel in my own being what it feels like to be loved unconditionally by another person. And I know through direct experience in myself how transformational that is. And so I have faith in that. And so that's the practice that I try and do throughout the day when I'm with other people. Because I see that it's, I believe in it and I care about them, but also I see that it's good for me. It's because it helps me try and fall back in loving awareness. I found that having some sense of duty or responsibility when it's not just about me, it helps me practice more. And so that's something that I try and build into my life.
In one of the recent Ram Dass podcast episodes, he was talking about the moment of transformation when he met Maharaji. And he said, it's been really hard to talk about, and I really haven't talked about it for decades of like what my actual path is, and my path of Guru Kripa, and where everything changed for him, where his orientation now shifted to become a vessel for loving awareness and for God, and so that people could have that moment of awakening, and as he says so often, to come out and play.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just so, like, to have that be your life's mission and goal, and like he was doing a lot of practices, and like they were hard. Like he did the yogi life for like a long time, and I can only get glimpses into like some of what he was doing, but I think about like what inspired him to keep going at least the root, um, was to be able to offer that to the world.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I had heard him really like clearly articulate like, I am doing this to try to like to be able to have somebody else like awaken in their heart.
Yeah, well, in Buddhism, bodhicitta, it's said that that's a prerequisite for enlightenment. So if we're doing it just self-centered, we're really just digging our hole deeper into our own ego. So bodhicitta, that's the desire for enlightenment for the sake of all beings. It's really that sense of that we're doing it for other people, and that we're doing it for us. And that's something that I just keep awakening to more and more, that it really, really does change everything.
Yeah.
I also think a lot, because it really is the hardest thing to talk about is Guru Kripa. But it really is the heart of it for all of us in our satsang. And it's interesting because, Ram Dass has done all these different practices over time, but, I've heard, all these different talks, like even when he's doing all these different practices, and even if he forgot temporarily, it's pretty clear that he knew like the whole way, like what he was doing. It was all just about him getting himself closer to the guru, and just trusting his own intuitive heart, which that's what Guru Kripa is. And that's the part also where it's both terrifying and full freedom, because there's no rule book,
Right.
like Ram Dass's path isn't going to look the same as yours or mine. Except that our job is just to keep plumbing the depths of our heart as deeply as we can, and listening as clearly as we can, and taking that next step as faithfully as we can, just trusting that guru's wisdom. And that's the whole thing. But Kripa, that grace, it's, because when I remember or I forget, like there's the mechanism of remembering itself is grace. Like it's this disruption of the normal, ego function. There's no way that you can will that. We can do things to set a context, right? By doing certain mantras or practices that will make it more likely that we're kind of grace prone. But
Right.
even our desire to do those practices,
Totally.
where does that come from? And just,
Yep.
and the more and more that we just get to realize that, there's just this huge softening and just relaxing, and just, it's just that realization that we're totally safe. And that doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen, but that we're totally safe. And that God is really here and is really guiding this whole thing. And it's just it's such a fierce and sometimes overwhelming realization that all you can do is just keep letting go into it, because there's nothing else to do anyway. But yeah, how do you talk about that?
Well, and that brings up an interesting thing just with our culture and surrender.
Yeah.
And we're not used to it. And I know for myself, like that, that's basically the name of my game. Just, can I surrender? Can I come out of judgment? Can I come out of desire? Like, can I trust into the fact that I'm supported? And I think the thing that keeps on driving me, is that grace for sure.
Yeah.
But also some of those experiences of when I have let go into the universe and have just felt more supported and more alive than I do in my day to day, for sure, when there is all that clinging.
Yeah.
And so that's that, like, all right, like, I don't understand at all. I don't understand who Maharaji is. I don't understand who Siddhi was, Ram Dass. Like, I don't understand myself. And I don't know. It's just kind of, it feels like a magnet.
Yeah.
And you just keep showing up, and that's the part that's given me the faith too, of like, I don't know what's going on, and I keep showing up in positions and places with people who, I mean, it's kind of one of our things when we all hang out, but at some point I'm just gonna look around and just be like, God, I'm so thankful for like all of you. Like, you are all just so extremely dear to me, and I feel so graced to have you in my life. Yeah. And I think through I've felt I wasn't looking for love when I started with Ram Dass, and I was looking for teachings. It's interesting now, the thing that helps just keep me so involved and grounded and interested and kind of like explosive is the love and the connection that I've felt from the satsang, which was another one of those surrender pieces of moving out of a space of judgment, and of like, who are these people? Like, everybody here is insane. Like, this is a madhouse.
Yeah.
And it was funny. Like, it just felt like there were, like, that I had the problem. Like, everybody else seemed like kind of happy to love and just be wild. And yeah, took a long time to start like having value in that and dying into it.
Yeah. No, but that's beautiful though. I was thinking while you're talking about when we were in Santa Cruz with the Mirabai Star and Hanuman Das and Rita Green.
Mm-hmm.
And I said something about how I found that faith and doubt can coexist simultaneously. And Mirabai Star said something really interesting I've been thinking about a lot since then. And she says, yeah, that's true. And I would add that they actually have to. And I think that's actually the level where we get confused about surrender. And I think that's also the reason why, a lot of us get ourselves into trouble. I mean, it's like every teachers left and right, and like every spiritual organization right now are having these huge abuse cases and all these things. And there's this level where it's like we want to surrender because we've got a taste of it and we think it's good for us, and then we kind of override our system, and then we kind of overlook all of the warning signs that are there. But I think when we see that kind of surrenderless surrender, it's really just like falling in love. It's like you can't help it. And like with my partner, I've definitely fallen in love with her, but my mind still like has ways of having doubts about things. It's just that deeper trust has been gained that I don't have to pay it much attention, or but that's very different than choosing to surrender, and kind of overriding our system. And the fact that we have this faculty of mind that can doubt and that can even sometimes wonder if like what we're doing even makes sense or not, or if our spiritual community is crazy, or who are these people, who is Siddhi Ma. The fact that we have this doubting mind, it's supposed to doubt, and the fact that we can also experience grace and this vast expanse of love beyond our wildest dreams, even with our doubting mind, I mean, that's a miracle. I mean, it's a truly just a miracle of nature.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about all the cases and places where abuse has shown up, and where places where there hasn't been integrity, places where there's been tremendous pain and suffering and manipulation, and just yeah, like really bad acts, right? Acts of violence. How do you not throw out the baby with the bath? How do you not go, you know what, like this is the person who was on this path. I believed in all of this, and like this is what happens. This is what it looks like. Yeah, what would you speak to that?
Well, I don't know that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I think that I think that there's people who, because they're taken advantage of and they gave themselves to these systems, that that they might decide that the best thing for them is to not engage with some kind of system like that ever again, to protect their own heart. And I know there's this, I've talked to people that, essentially become atheists, since, being in systems like that, and their mental health is better now than it was before. So there's that element, but I think the reason why people are able to take advantage of these systems is because of the fact that a lot of us just have this yearning in the heart to give ourselves over to something pure. And I don't know that we can will that to go away. It really hurts my heart so much that there's people that abuse just the goodwill and the sincere seeking of other people. But, and maybe we'd all be better off if we didn't have that. I mean, I don't know, but I don't know that you can will that to go away. All I know is that the first time that I gained a truth of the depth of my own being, that ineffable presence outside of my identification with my mind and my body, the first thought that came back into my being after having that experience was, I love you. And it was just the purest thought. I mean, it was a natural thought, and I can't help it, but I am a devotee. That is my natural relationship with the divine. And, and a devotee just wants to worship. And so it's my job to find the purest forms that I can to worship, because, and it's the job of a teacher to be impeccable, and so, yeah, I mean, it's just the same way. Like, I mean, we're all looking for love and interpersonal relationships, and all of us have awful heartbreak stories, past people that cheated on us or whatever. And yet we keep looking, I mean, it's just, and we keep looking because it feels worth it for us for some reason to keep doing that. And we keep hearing stories, and some of us have found it, of, that you can have good relationships. And so if that's true in the human realm, then then what to say of God? So I think it's just a natural, I think some of us are just wired to look for forms of God that we can worship. And all I know is that I've gained everything from Ram Dass, and I am madly in love with him. Like, I'm just in love with him. Everyone has their own, grief process right now of him leaving his body. And I think everyone's is beautiful. I actually feel closer to him now than ever before. And whenever I bring his image to my mind, it just brings me so much joy. Like, my heart instantly opens. I can't help that. And then on top of it, there's all these teachings from devotional literature that say, not only can't you help it, but if you want to, there's things that you can do to make your heart open up wider.
Right.
And I just keep trying to drink the Kool-Aid.